Please be seated. Pop quiz. I know you didn't expect it. Maybe you're thinking, gosh, I should have had that other cup of coffee. I think you'll get it, and we grade on a curve, so it's okay. If you were to distill the entire gospel down to one word, what word would it be? Love. I heard you first. Gold star. You get 2 pieces of communion bread. Well done. Love. I think we know this well by now, right? This passage that we hear today in the gospel as Jesus answers the question of the greatest law, a passage that we recite at all of our services, and all the people in the story of the gospel would have been saying twice a day, morning and evening, at least the first half, as we heard, picked up out of the book of Leviticus, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. And then we hear Jesus add on to that, and love your neighbor as yourself. We know these 2 great commandments. We recite them. We know that love is the center of all things when it comes to our faith. And what Jesus does here is he creates this little triad of love, another trinity of sorts between God and neighbor and ourselves, that whenever you're talking about love in any of those contexts, it automatically refers to the other 2 as well. If you're going to love your neighbor, you're loving God. If you're loving God, you're going to be loving your neighbor, and you can't do either if you don't understand the love for yourself because God first loved us. So we get this. This is the core. This is the center. This is the foundation. This is the anchor. All those things that we talk about with love. That's why we hear about it and talk about it so often. But in talking about it so often and listening to the church try to process love and how that means something in our life, my fear is that the church and those of us who are adherents of the church sometimes lessen what love is. I don't want to say we dumb it down, but maybe we hallmark it down a little bit, right? We have some version of love that is less than what Jesus talks about, what God intends when talking about love. So that for a lot of us, love becomes like being nice on steroids, right? We're gonna say nice things. We're gonna do nice things. We're not gonna upset anybody. We're gonna try to care for everybody, and that's love. Love is never gonna make anybody upset. Love is never gonna challenge anybody. It's never gonna be a problem. Except that the love that we see ironically on display in Jesus is that and something else at the same time. So we see the love that is caring for others, welcoming the outcast, touching the sick and healing them, all the things that Jesus does that puts us in that realm of love is nice and caring and just absorbs everybody in a great big bear hug. But there's another aspect to love. If we think that Jesus' center is love as well, that God's center is love, that everything we see going on in the Gospels comes from a place of love. So Jesus' love is not a shrinking love. It's not a passive love. It is very much active. And at times, we might say, aggressive. Think about where this comes from in Matthew's gospel. We've been in the lectionary for the last 6 weeks, hearing of these controversies and conflicts between Jesus and the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, and the temple leaders. They're going at each other. Now they've been trying to trick Jesus. We heard last week, who do we pay taxes to? That was a political trick. There was a moral trick that we skipped over since last Sunday in the lectionary when they say, what about the lady who married 7 brothers? Whose husband is she when she dies? And Jesus helps them not trick him on that one. And now it's a question about the law, and he gives a right and good answer. They've realized they have to stop asking him trick questions. It doesn't go well for him. But throughout this controversy, throughout this back and forth where Jesus is critical and challenging with his parables and his teachings, he is bold. He is brave. He is on the offensive at sometimes. And if it doesn't feel like that, flip ahead to the next chapter when he keeps going with his criticism and his woe to all these people in authority for how they have mangled what God intends. He's not sitting back and just being what we would normally consider nice. He's on the offensive, which shouldn't surprise us. Earlier in Matthew's gospel, we heard the story of Peter, who Jesus gives the name Peter, the rock upon which the church is to be built. And the piece that comes right after that says, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. We don't talk about hell and the devil very often. That's not our thing as Episcopalians. But that's a church on the offense. A church built on love is on the offense, and it's the gates of hell that can't keep love out, can't keep the church out. Where we tend to flip that around, and we tend to think of the church sometimes as the place we go. Our faith is the place we go to close the gates on the world around us and find protection from the things that scare us and worry us and trouble us that seem too big for us to deal with. And we think, well, we're just going to hide behind our faith. We're going to hide behind Jesus, and maybe it'll all be okay. That's defensive love. That is not a love that is taking it to evil, so to speak, taking it to the dark places of the world. That's a love that sits back, and hope is lovely. We heard in our collect today, we want more hope. But there's another piece to this when we talk about love as Jesus understands it. Love of God, love of neighbor, love of self. Not just about being nice and hoping that everything turns out okay. There's a theologian named Stanley Hauerwas. Some of you are familiar with that name. He had this phrase that he used once, and William Willimon, another pastor and theologian, picked it up and wrote an article some years ago about how we tend to turn Jesus into versions of ourselves. And they were getting at it from a sense sometimes of pastors and priests, but also of congregations. What we expect from clergy, what clergy expect from themselves, and then meaning that must be how Jesus is, right? The phrase that they use is a quivering mass of availability. It's a great phrase. It's not a positive phrase, a quivering mass of availability that says that what the church is about is making sure that everybody is comfortable, that everybody's cared for, that nobody gets challenged, that nobody gets upset, that we're really just at a drop of a hat, whatever we can do to make life easier. That's what the church is about. That's what leadership is about, a quivering mass of availability. That is not what we see on display in Jesus. He certainly is available to people and healing and teaching and curing and all those sorts of things. But there is this other side to his love in action that is out there standing up to authorities and challenging people to their faces. He is saying hard things that sometimes you're like, gosh, Jesus, you sound a little mean. But he's speaking truth in a loving way, and it does make people uncomfortable. It can make people uncomfortable. And we realize that love isn't meant to sit back all the time, maybe rarely. It's meant to be put into action. When we talk about love as followers of Jesus, it's not some curio in a cabinet that we look at and hope the light hits a certain way as we sit in our recliner and look at it. It's not a badge on a vest or a sash that we've earned to say, yes, I understand the love of God and love of neighbor. I've taken that Bible study. I've got that. It's meant to be put into practice, to truly be a foundation, an anchor, and a starting point for everything that we do. So that we don't just hope for the world around us, we put love into action to help make hope a reality. Here's a practical example. We've been talking this year, as many in our community have, about homelessness and the challenges that has created within our wider Glynn County community. Along the way, one of the things I realized is that there are about 200 people on the waiting list for public housing in our community. Do you know why it's only 200? Because that's as big as the waiting list is. There's more than that. They just can't record who all is waiting, and anytime a unit gets filled, there's 199 more people who move forward, and they add one to the back of the waiting list. Also found out from some colleagues that part of that is because there is unused capacity within public housing. There's a large number of units that don't have people in them because there's something wrong with them that needs to be fixed up before people can be allowed to move in. So our friends at A Better Glynn, an organization that formed a few years ago in Glynn County to do what its name suggests, create a better Glynn, have come up with this idea for a day of service on November 11th. It's a Saturday coming up. They got permission from the Housing Authority to get volunteers and go into some of these units that need basic stuff. This isn't hard. just stuff that needs to get done so that it's move-in ready. We're not talking habitat, pouring foundations and building walls and roofs. We're talking more paintbrushes, turning screwdrivers, maybe a little bit of hammer and nail work. And they think with the right number of volunteers on the 11th, they can get 100 housing units back online in one day. That's 300 to 400 people. So there's the way of love that hopes, and there's the way of love that takes action. So you're going to get an email from me this week with the link to A Better Glen to sign up if you're interested. It's not for everybody. It's not to guilt those who say, no, that's not for me. I'm not a painter or a screwdriver turner or anything like that. But it's an example of love in action. And you can sign up if you want to. Full disclosure, I can't be there on the 11th. It's the Diocese of Georgia's convention up in Augusta, and by the time we finish up convention and drive back, the day of service will be over. But I'm joining my brother over at St. Athanasius, Father Dwayne Cope, who has already offered to A Better Glen, if there's units that don't get done on Saturday, put me in, coach. I'll be there, and I'll bring some people along. So this probably won't be the only day that there's work. But that's a way of love that gets put in action. And it happens all the time in all kinds of ways that we know. We have ways of putting love in action at Christ Church, right? So we didn't just hope that somebody fed hungry kids. We have people who make sure that we feed hungry kids. And we feed hungry adults. We go to Manna House. We go to Second Harvest and pack bags for seniors. There's a note in your announcements about that. We go to Burroughs Millette and we mentor and tutor kids. We help dyslexic kids learn how to read. We hold up teachers who have a really hard job and let them know that somebody notices what they're doing. We are out there putting love in action all the time in lots of ways. Although we may not have used those words, that's part of the storytelling you've been hearing with the annual fund mailings that you've been getting, with the video that we made, is to say, this is a congregation that does put love in action. And when we do that, lives change. Communities change. They improve. God's kingdom is built. And all those things, no matter how small, when love is put into action, amazing things happen. Now, we might ask somebody what's most important in their life. Somebody might say, family is most important in my life. That's what I operate for. That's why I work hard, because family is important. The hard part is in some of those cases, if you go to the person's family and you ask them, what do you think is most important in your dad's life or your mom's life or your spouse's life? Sometimes you hear a different response, don't you? You hear, well, I think it must be work because they're never home. They don't make it to the dinner table when we sit down. They haven't been to one of my games or my plays or something. We think that our driver sometimes is to accomplish and support one thing when it may have an unintended and absent effect at the same time. Or we say faith is central to my life. My religion, my belief in God and Jesus, that is my driver. That's at my core. But what if we ask the people who know us, who see us in the community, will they be able to say clearly that person's number one identity is being a follower of Jesus? Or will we seem like everybody else they know and don't stand out in any perceivable way as somebody who lives as though faith is at the center of their life? One way to know that love is at the center of our life, love of God and neighbor and self, is to put it into action. To live love, to truly be anchored and centered and rooted in love as the driver for all that we do. To not always be passive, but sometimes, yes, go on the offensive and make a hope a reality. Make a wish come true. Build God's kingdom. So we started with a pop quiz. We're going to end with a pop quiz because you did so well in the first one. You don't have to worry, you already got an A. If you were to boil down and distill your entire life and being into one word, what would it be? Wait. Don't tell me. Show me.